Talk about the dangers of success. I'll be maybe a bit of a buzzkill, but I don't think so if we stick it out through what I'm going to talk about. This room of all the rooms on the planet right now with salespeople in it, this is about as successful as we get. So I want to talk about some of these dangers that success has embedded in them, so that you know a little bit more what they are, so that you have a little bit more of the tools and strategies to overcome them, and so you also feel more confident as it's happening. I want to start with a quote by Thomas Watson Sr., who was the founder of IBM. And he said, "Whenever an individual or a company feels success has been attained, progress stops." That's the essence of what I want to talk about today. Now, Annalie had some running videos yesterday. I have another one for you. And this is an example of someone who feels success has been attained. And I want you to see him celebrating his win. And I also want you to see the replay, the second part. Watch his face. He's with the University of Oregon, the white shirt on, and see his reaction to what happens as he feels success has been attained. We've all been there in one form or another. So Josh Siebert had a definition of success yesterday that a little different than mine. It was very similar, actually, but I'll use this one for today's conversation. And as you take notes, I want you to write this one down, the accomplishment of an aim or a purpose, because that'll be our guiding kind of part of our conversation. Now, who here's bought a mutual fund? You all bought mutual funds or invest, right? So when you buy a mutual fund, they have that disclaimer when they show you the rate of return in the past. And it's past performance is not an indicator of future results. Unfortunately, salespeople sometimes forget this. Who knows a salesperson is still living on what they sold years ago, and right? And some of you and managers have hired that person and wondered what happened. That person who was a rock star in the interview and is a doofus after you hire them. So the Fortune 500, think of that group. Fortune 500 are the most successful companies on the planet. They have the most to invest in the business to protect the business and grow the business on marketing and R&D. If you look at the most successful companies from 1955 in the Fortune 500, in 2 years ago, there's 60 that are left. 440 of the most successful companies in the world aren't on the list. Many of them aren't even in business anymore. The average amount of time a company spends on the Fortune 500 used to be 67 years. It's 15 years now. All these logos here were on the Fortune 500 in 2012, and they're not on it anymore. Sears, which is up here, you think of Sears. Who grew up going to Sears? Who's been in a Sears lately? Like cemeteries are more lively, right? It's depressing. And so Sears was the world's most successful retailer. They are down 98% in market cap since 2006. They were the most successful. Who went right past them? Walmart. Walmart, since 2006, has stalled a bit. They are up 23% in 12 years. Who's up 4,000%? Right, Amazon. The world is changing. Sales is changing. I mentioned on this stage a couple years ago Blockbuster. Blockbuster is the famous example, most successful in their space in their time. They could have bought Netflix for $50 million. Imagine being the person who didn't make that decision. Their market cap as of lunch today is $138 billion when I checked it. $138 billion market cap. A more recent example is GoPro. Who's followed GoPro? GoPro was hugely successful. Nick Woodman, one of the founders, has been doing the business press circuit in the last couple of months, if you've read, and he's admitting, you know, we took our eye off the ball. We were super successful, and we got into all these areas we shouldn't have gotten into. So when I talk about this topic, many people are like, okay, that's interesting, but how does it apply to me? Because these are companies. in sales, like what's the deal? But really, companies are people. Companies are just a collection of the people, and the psychology of those people adds up into what the company does or doesn't do. And so what we can plan on happening with companies actually filters down to people. And it all comes down, a big part of this, to comfort zone. We've all been in comfort zones. I don't know, maybe 30 years ago probably, I went in for a physical exam. And I got the blood test back, and the doctor said, everything looks pretty good, but I want to talk to you about your cholesterol. So I'm in like my early mid-20s at the time, so I'm not thinking cholesterol, like who thinks about that? And so he says, I have your number for you, and he gave me this number. And I didn't know what that number meant. At the time, I was in a bowling league, and my average was 160. So 240 to me, that was a pretty good number, right? That's my frame of reference. Like, he's sort of, yeah, cool. He's like, no, not cool. So I made some changes in diet and exercise, and I got to 174. But then success had been attained, and progress stopped. And I went to see one of my old buddies, Big Mac, and his friends, and stopped my exercise, and my next number was 222. And so this is predictable if you're watching out for it. A couple years ago in this room, I also made a prediction that the Cubs would win the World Series. Okay. That was pretty cool. That was pretty cool to say that. So last year I came back and I bragged a bit about it, gloated about it, and I got a little too cocky, and I made a prediction for those of you that were here that the Cubs were going to win again. They were going to win 2. I should have prefaced what year they'd win the second one. I wasn't clear on that. It was assumed that it was last year, and this is the flag we flew last year. But what's interesting is all the baseball writers dissected why they didn't repeat. The pitching and the hitting. But when you really looked at it, I think the psychology of success didn't help the Cubs in that second year. I mean, how many teams have a hard time repeating? We could talk about all the reasons all day long, but I guarantee you, those Cubs of 2016 wanted it way worse than the Cubs of 2017. 108 years is a long time to wait. So in my book, The Contrarian Salesperson, which Mike had mentioned, I talk about, does anyone read it? It's not very good, so, okay. A few of you have. It's mediocre. So I gave the example in there, I think that applies to comfort zone. That's Mount Everest. Mount Everest is 29,029 feet. And so there's the base camp you get to looks like this. And when you get to the base camp, you're halfway up, you're at like 17,000 feet and change. And as you're climbing the mountain, of course, it's getting more dangerous. So you go to Camp 2 and you go to Camp 3 and you spend, I don't know, like a week there and acclimate to the altitude. And so you get like to Camp 3, let's say, at 23,000 feet, and you look out, and it's a pretty good view. And you're like, this is pretty cool. And by the way, there's an area near the summit called the death zone, right? Which is a bit different than comfort zone, I'm guessing, from what we're talking about. And so you're at Camp 3, and you say, I'm entering the death zone. There's a lot of risk. It's going to be tough. Maybe I'll just camp. Do I need to keep climbing? This is kind of cool. And who here knows somebody in their career, they've been camping for multiple years, and at some point, it's actually taking them back. They're using the analogy, I guess they're going to run out of food someday. Because there's no such thing as just staying static. You're either going forward or backwards, and that's the tough thing. So the triggers I see for salespeople typically are things like they have a great month. This puts them in the comfort zone. Great quarter, great year. They have a big account currently that's getting them in the comfort zone. They closed a big deal. They have a big income year. And they get in that comfort zone. They stall. But I want you to ask yourself, and we're all in comfort zones in some part of our life, but I want you to ask yourself, like, what are you built for? There's that John Shedd quote that I love, which is, ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for. So what are you built for? Are you built for the harbor, or are you built for the open seas? There's risk on the open seas. It's scary. So I want you to write down any of these that jump out at you. These are categories that you might be in a comfort zone. How about your relationships? Are you in a relationship place where you're in a comfort zone, personal or professional? How about your health? How about finances? How about your investments with finances? We've had a pretty long summer with this bull market. Winter is coming. Are you ready for that? It's coming. It's just a question of when it's going to come. How about your career? How are you in your career? Are you in a comfort zone? Personal development, prospecting behavior. How about your current accounts? This is a classic place people get comfortable. Who's been guilty of getting comfortable with an existing account and then it went away because you weren't doing the right stuff? Relationship Builder is a tool I did want to point out here. So who's familiar with Relationship Builder? This is a tool you can get from your Sandler trainer. And it's a tool that really is designed to, at the top, you fill in the key contacts and their disc profile, and if you're connected on LinkedIn, those sorts of things. But the value of this tool, I think, to help you get out of comfort zone is the bottom, where you figure out how can you build and enhance your relationships with your current relationships, with your current relationships, but in the current state or in the future. How can you improve things now and going forward? You know, salespeople make this call. Who's seen a salespeople make the call that's just checking in? Hey, just wanted to stop by. Hey, just wanted to touch base. Is that creating value? Who's that call all about? It's about the salesperson. I want to be the person who has this person? The phone rings, you look at the caller ID, and you're like, not taking that call, right? I want to be the call that when they look down, they see caller ID, they say, I got to take that call. I always get energy or value out of that conversation. I want to be the salesperson that is the one that they take the call from every day because they know there's value in every conversation I'm bringing to them. So what kind of value are you bringing on a regular basis, or are you falling into the rut of the comfort zone with existing accounts where you're making the just stopping in call? Kind of pathetic. Not that you would do this, but those other salespeople, it's not good. So let's talk strategies. I have 3 strategies for you. Write this first one down. Number 1, be paranoid. Write this one, be paranoid. Now, I'm not talking about the clinical definition that would get you, I don't know, medicated or hospitalized. I'm talking about extremely fearful. Right? A common business phrase of paranoid, I think it started, at least for me, with Andy Grove, one of the co-founders of Intel. He wrote this book called Only the Paranoid Survive. Almost 20 years ago. Who's read this one? This is one of those classic business books you should all read. And it was the first business book I read where I had permission not to be overly optimistic, because everything I had read was just be positive. And Grove said, you know what? You better be looking over your shoulder. There's threats all around. And he said that much of Intel's success was being able to have that mindset so they're always prepared. There's a term in business schools now being taught called defensive pessimism. Bill Gates talks about this too, about defensive pessimism is always being a bit paranoid. And the classic paranoid phrase I'd suggest you journal every day is every client I have is a prospect for somebody else. If you live this, you're going to act differently. Now, there's an entire industry that wasn't paranoid. There's a lot of industries, but the big 3. How many saw that in the 60s, 50s, early 70s, the big 3 automakers were in a bit of a comfort zone? And quality suffered, customer service suffered, and who came along to change that? Right? With Edward Deming's help, the Japanese came in and completely changed the game of the automotive. And now, think about the automotive industry. The entire industry has been in a comfort zone. They've all had electric technology for decades, but they were in the petroleum, right? The petroleum comfort zone, we'll call it. And who came along? Tesla. Tesla's market cap right now is right behind GM. It's crazy. So think about where should your paranoia be? One of them is in technology. So I want to shift gears for a bit. In this room, I want this to be about thinking. I don't have all the answers what I'm going to share with you, but I do know I've been in sales long enough to hear these predictions every 5 or 10 years about the death of the salesperson. Who's heard some form of this? Oh, salespeople aren't going to be around and this many. And I think we've become numb to it, and maybe we're in a comfort zone and in denial, because I've heard it so many times that when I hear it, I discount it. But I do know that with the changes in the world happening, that technology will disrupt selling. It's going to happen. And do you think there's going to be 10 years from now with everything happening in the world, there's more salespeople or less salespeople? And there's going to be more. So we're not all going away. The ones who survive are the ones who are going to be paranoid enough to be able to adapt. Who remembers, and the robots are coming, but who remembers who this is? What's her name? What's her name? I think it's a her. She's dressing like a her. Rosie the robot from the Jetsons. So here's where robotics are today, and I think that this is from Boston Dynamics. This could be your next competition. Just imagine this robot with a briefcase or a PowerPoint deck or whatever you'd call that. If we could play the video. Pretty cool. I'm not very technical, but I was sitting with someone at a conference where they unveiled this, and we saw the actual robots, and he said it was pretty complicated to do that, and I'm guessing it would be, the technology. Now, some of you know this kind of a robotic. If you're in manufacturing, you probably have something that's like this in the plant that's replaced people over the last number of years. But there's robots all around us. If you have a Roomba, you've got a robot. I was in Tempe not too long ago and saw this Waymo. Who's seen a Waymo? It's a driverless taxi service. It's pretty weird to see. There's a driver there, but they're not doing anything, and it just kind of pulls up and it's there. I don't know if anyone's using these robots. This is being used now in business. It's the Beam by Suitable Technologies. And the person on the screen here operates it. So if we had beams in the back, they could drive around a conference like this because they couldn't travel here or whatever the reason was, and they can interact. And I was at a conference a couple months ago. I had a 15-minute conversation at like a networking thing with somebody who was on that, and it's surprisingly not weird. It's like for 15 seconds it's weird, but after it's a conversation. Now we're connected on LinkedIn after we traded information. It's just, and so this is where things are going. Now, this isn't everything, but if you look at this is an application of Beam in a plant. So I'm going to share with you 4 different kind of converging technologies that I want you to think about how it's going to affect you, because these are affecting us in different ways, depending on your industry, depending on what you do, but they're going to affect everyone in this room somehow. Now, the first one's machine learning. You might write this down because I'm going to have you pick one of these that makes sense to you. Machine learning, for those of you that don't know, is the ability for computers to learn. And like people, they experiment and they learn, they keep getting smarter and smarter and smarter, and it happens really fast. IBM Watson, you may recall, made a lot of news when it beat, 6, 7 years ago, Ken Jennings at Jeopardy. And now, as you'd imagine, it's advancing, at lightning speed, but this is going to affect us. And if you were to go to the hospital and get an x-ray, you could have a machine read it or a person. Now, the person who's going to read it, the radiologist, they might be going on 2 hours of sleep, hungover, fatigued. They just looked at their phone. They got a crappy email from someone, and they're in a bad mood, and they're the 50th x-ray of the day, and they're reading yours. Or you could have the machine that's read 10 million, is as sharp as they were before they read the 10 millionth, and they're going to read yours with pinpoint accuracy, early detection. Who do you want to look at it? And we think this is stopping with x-rays. This isn't going to impact us in sales. Now, on the side of this, we have artificial intelligence. Who has an Alexa or an Echo or a Google Home? Right? John and I've talked about this. John Rosso and I've talked about this. This is where things are going. Now, 2 years ago, Alexa had 130 learnings or apps. A year ago, they had 7,000. They have 25,000 as of January. And guess what Alexa's going to learn to do? Hey, can you get me a quote? Hey, can you answer this technical question? Artificial intelligence and machine learning is going to take much of what we do when it comes to technical knowledge and make it obsolete. Remember David Sandler's story about the Battle of Hastings? Right? When's the last time you got paid for knowing that date? Well, you don't need to know the date. You don't need to know the signers of the Declaration of Independence. You don't need to know any of that information anymore. Education is being completely transformed by this because kids aren't going to be taught memorization. They're going to be taught critical thinking skills. And so the salespeople who are in the world today, who are relying on their industry knowledge and expertise in their field, are being minimized by the day with these technologies. On top of that, you look at augmented reality. So if you look on your phone, well, don't look at your phone now, but who's done Pokemon Go? Augmented reality is the real world and technology. And this is having a lot of impacts in different aspects of business. In surgeries, they're now using it in surgeries to hold up to an actual surgery to make sure they're not missing part of the procedure. Bosch has this application here, which helps guide through a repair of an engine. So now you can hire a lower skilled technical force and have them do the same kind of repairs as they go along. And on top of that, you got virtual reality. Who's experienced VR? VR is pretty weird. VR is going to be one of our biggest impacts in sales if you look at what's happening here. And this thing here, who remembers the brick phone? The Motorola brick phone, okay? The brick phone morphed into this, and I got my case on this. This is about twice the size of what it needs to be. This is the brick phone of VR. We're really close to having them look pretty close to my glasses based on the film technology they have to be able to do that. And virtual reality, I did a demo where I was at a conference where I put the goggles on and they had me walk this area, and as the visual I was looking at was, I was like on a plank. It was about a foot wide. And I'm walking this plank with these goggles on, and so a foot wide is pretty wide, right? So like right now, I could just walk. I wouldn't have to look. I'm not going to go off a foot. But when you put the goggles on, and it's like 1,000 feet down, and it feels real, I'm like doing this, like, you know. And it got to the very end, and the plank ends. And the guy says, okay, jump. And I'm like, I must have stood there. It felt like 20 minutes. It was probably a minute. But all I had to do was that. It took me at least a minute to get the courage to do what intellectually I knew I was jumping on a flat floor, but my brain was telling me not to do it. He told me afterwards, half the people like freak out. They just take them off and say, I can't do that. Can't do it. Right? So these are all converging, and I'm not sure exactly how. I have some ideas, and I've seen some early indicators, but this is going to impact everybody in this room. And I thought for today, because of the forward-thinking thought leader type environment we have here, this is a place to think about it. And so the question I have for you is, which of the technologies that are out there today are you think are going to affect you? What did you just see that might impact part of you? And I find this is one of those things like, what was that stat that said like 85% of drivers think they're above average? You ever hear that? So it's like, okay, that can't be. How can 85%? So I think a lot of people, when they look at these technologies, think, well, it's going to affect another industry. It's not going to affect me. It's affecting everybody. And I think there's the numbers we're looking at. These are my estimates, but I think 75 years ago, 80% of a salesperson's value was product industry knowledge, being really smart, and 20% was selling skills. And then David Sandler came along and others and said, okay, well, you know what? We need to have much better selling skills, but you still need 50% of your skill set needs to be technical. You still need to know your stuff. And everything we talk in Sandler, you still need the product knowledge to ask better questions and qualify and everything we talk about. But how much of the world is moving to this? And I think it's going to get to 595. That 20% of a salesperson's value is going to be product knowledge. When someone can ask an app, machine learning, artificial intelligence with virtual reality a question and doesn't have to pick up the phone and deal with a salesperson, they're going to go there most of the time. So our ability to survive is going to be the ability to adapt in this world and work on those things we control and not the ones we can't. So often I run into people who are so focused on their product knowledge and industry knowledge and like, okay, but the machine's going to be able to answer that way more effectively. So how to break through? Here's a couple ideas. First of all, what we've been talking about, identify what you think the technology threats are going to be for you, in your business, for you, in your industry. Second is looking at those categories I gave you, do a comfort zone inventory. Look at these categories here and ask yourself, which one am I in a comfort zone now? And the last one is pre-mortems. Anyone do pre-mortems? You've heard of post-mortem, right? Post-mortem is like the autopsy. Things didn't go so good, and so we're going to figure out what went wrong. And businesses have done post-mortems. You've done a post-mortem. You lost an account, and you're like, what happened? And then you figure out what happened, and you're, okay, let's not do that again. But a pre-mortem is you do it before you lose the account. So here's the 4 steps to a pre-mortem. If you're not doing this, this is a really good paranoid exercise. So pick an account. Pick one of your big accounts and say, okay, got the account, we just lost it. Like you were at lunch today, and they called and said, we're done. And you're like, what? And what did we do? Step 3 is what happened? What happened to get that call? And step 4 is what can you change now that you can get ahead of what's happening? I guarantee you there's multiple people in this room who are getting ready to lose an account that you don't even know you're getting ready to lose it. The pre-mortem can help identify that. A lot of people don't want to do it because they don't want to be paranoid. Let's just think positively. Okay, so consider pre-mortems. Number 2 strategy, write this one down, disrupt yourself. Disrupt yourself. So there's a term in the technology world, at least it started there, and that's pretty common in business, which is this: disrupt yourself or be disrupted. Right? That's the world we live in as salespeople. It's a species of salespeople. I think this is the mindset we have to have today going forward. And think of industries that are out there that were disrupted. You know, the telegraph industry said this about the telephone. Right? We had the horse and buggy industry say that the automobile is a novelty and a fad. We had the silent movie industry say, who the hell wants to hear actors talk? Then we had the movie industry say, television won't last long, people are going to get tired of looking at a plywood box. And we've all heard the stories about computers, who's going to need them? And then we had the media and newspaper industry say about the internet, oh, the internet's a fad, that's going away. And so we've had this disruption that's happened in industries, and we've actually had it in sales already, and it's coming quickly. The one we've had that I think about all the time is this one, which is account management. Think in account management, very specific with cast of characters. So let me rewind like 25 years ago. I'm a salesperson. Part of my value as a salesperson 25 years ago, even 15, was being able to map this out. And I could go to the company and say, you need me to be able to figure out who the people in the company are. And there were things like, at least we had the Illinois Manufacturers Directory, which was like this big, but it was all dated, it wasn't good. So they needed me to go in and figure out who was there. But now, let's say that was 25% of my value. Well, now you can hire an intern to use these 2 tools, and in 20 minutes, they can figure out what they used to need me to go do. That's been completely disrupted. Now, what they still need me for as a salesperson is in Sandler in the decision step. Okay? So if you think in cast of characters, artificial intelligence and machine learning can't figure these things out. Can't figure out who the ultimate is, who the influencers are, the users are, economic, technical buyers. They can't figure out who the friends are in there, who's neutral, who our enemies are. They still need us for that. But the question we have to ask ourselves with all these changes is how long will it be until the machines can figure out some of this information too? There's already a technology that will read your LinkedIn profile and tell you your DISC profile. You don't think there's something someone's working on to better figure out how to give information as to who the real players in an organization are? Now here's another area that we've been disrupted and are getting more disrupted. Giving demos, tours, and presentations. So doing dog and pony shows, and I say that's bad. Presentation skills are really important. And in Sandler, I think sometimes at least I minimize it because we spend so much time on pain budget decision. But it's still important. But think about what's happening in the world with things like VR. So you got VR. If I have a company with 100 salespeople who can all go do presentations differently at differing levels of competency, I might sit back and say, why would I not create something that's really good virtually, that feels real to the prospect, and I know consistently they're going to get the right message. I know consistently that's going to work. That day is coming, and for some organizations that I've read about very recently, that is here. How about giving tours? Who gives tours of your facility? Who's had a tour go sideways, where you're giving the tour and they see something they shouldn't see? Like someone doing something really weird or something? Or they talk to someone they shouldn't talk to? Well, that can be controlled now. Toyota has a way, so instead of getting onto, if we could play that video, instead of having to go see the Toyota plant, you could put goggles on and you can go into the Toyota plant and it's a little, if you had the goggles on, you turn and you can see what's happening. That's the interaction that we can have. So my value 25 years ago used to be, another part of my value is presentation, tours, doing demos. Well, that's going to be taken away. Right? Next slide, if we could do. Meetings. So this is one to disrupt yourself on now. I don't know how many of you are using these technologies, but these technologies are like we're there already, but I find that salespeople typically aren't using them to the level that they could be to their benefit, and they haven't disrupted themselves enough enough in this space. And we already know the science through neuro-linguistic programming that you learn in Sandler. And this is a U of I study. 10% of students are auditory, yet 80% of college instruction is in auditory mode, lecture. Yet there's salespeople making phone calls all day long with 10% of the people they're calling auditory, completely missing the opportunity to use these tools with the video capabilities. So if you haven't disrupted yourself yet to be able to, right now, call someone with Zoom versus calling them on their cell, I suggest it's wake-up time, because it's getting there quickly. And if your competitor knows how to take advantage of that slight edge of using visual versus just auditory, that could be the difference. Okay, so let's talk about disrupting ourselves here. Keeping with technology, what are your new technology capabilities? I had your threats, but what should you be working on? For example, with Zoom, if you don't know Zoom or go to Meeting or WebEx and you can't use it, if it's like one of those things that kind of freaks you out, that's something to figure out real soon. And next level Sandler skills. This is our saving grace for now. With all these changes coming, here's what the machines can't figure out and artificial intelligence won't get us to yet. Figuring out the nuances of the pain step, the personal, emotional, getting people motivated with pain. In the budget step, being able to help shape the expectations, getting people to create a budget they didn't have yet. In decision, figuring out how to get them to change the criteria, how to change the timeline. The machines haven't figured that out yet. Who knows how long that'll be? But this is where we should be spending our time. If we know the technical stuff is being minimized in value, this is what we need to be working on. Last one, stay hungry. Stay hungry. So the hunger is one of the strongest of all motivators. Devine calls it ambition and drive. Did anyone read the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, the interview with Keith Richards? Keith Richards is 74, and you say, if you've seen the Stones lately, they're still pretty good. I mean, they're like really good, and they're really tight, and they sound great. I almost said the A word. I have to do push-up every time I say that A word Mike said, so A-W-E-S-O-M-E, but if I spell it, it doesn't count. But they're really good still, and in the interview, the interviewer asked him, so you got all the money in the world, like why do you still tour? I said, well, we have passion, we love it, but all four of us in the band want to make each night better than the night before, and we truly believe that, and we go out with that mindset and that kind of energy. Bono from U2 just said the same thing. They still want to be the best band in the world because, like, why not? And so, do you still have that hunger? Do you still have that ambition and drive that gets you out of bed in the morning? Part of staying hungry also, I don't know if you've ever read The Millionaire Mind. The Millionaire Next Door, who's heard of that one? That was the more popular of Stanley's books. But The Millionaire Mind gets into the mindsets of people who have a high net worth. And in this study, it was people who had a $5 million or above net worth, self-created, not inherited. What do you think the grade point average grade point average of the highest net worth people in the study was? 2.92. Some of you are feeling better about yourselves. This is good. This is the self-esteem portion of today. Hope you like this. The C students, right? He found that GPA does not measure tenacity, courage, leadership, hustle. And the one thing he said that I highlighted in the book was that they have something to prove. C students have something to prove. That's what's good about being from the second city. Yeah, Chicago's the second city. We already have an inferiority complex. We're like the Jan Brady of cities, right? We're kind of stuck in that place. We're not New York. We're in the middle of the country. We're slow. Sometimes. David Sandler had this great saying. Anyone ever heard this one? Write down the names of 3 people who love to see you fail. When Mike introduced me 22 years ago when I started the business, I heard this and I I wrote these names down on an index card. And if I, like right now, if I close my eyes, I can picture those names. It got me through some times. And so who are the 3 people who want to see you fail? That's part of that hunger. That could be part of the drive for you. So 3 ways to address this. One's obvious for this room, it's goals. But I would just challenge this room that sometimes goals become we become numb to them, or it can be a once-a-year activity that sits in a drawer. And I just suggest it's something that you're living. And do you have that passion? Matt Newberger talked yesterday about what's your passion, and he touched on this. But do you have something that gets you out of bed in the morning, or is goals an intellectual exercise? And you show me someone who's hungry, they got something they're shooting for, whether we call it a goal or a destination or whatever we would refer that to. Next one is personal development. Okay? Where is your personal development commitment? You've probably heard this saying, you're either green and growing or ripe and rotting. And you got to ask yourself, where are you? And when I go to a conference, not so much here, but if I'm at a trade show or something, and someone hears what I do, they like to kind of boast, puff their chest out and brag and say, I have 20 years sales experience, which is usually code for this. They have 1 year times 20. Who here knows people like this? Right? That's just the movie Groundhog Day. Who's seen that? Like, that's a one-trick pony. You're doing the same thing over and over again. So 30 minutes per day is the gold standard on this one, from what I've observed and read. And the last one for staying hungry, I think, is really key, that sometimes is overlooked, is mastermind. And Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich talked about the mastermind. The most successful people in the world surrounded themselves with others who helped them get better, who pushed them, who helped drive them. Now, this room is a pretty good mastermind. It's 2 days. How many of you feel like after 2 days here, you could probably be making cold calls like right now, way better than you typically can? And you're like, this continue? Right? But this is like, I don't even know our dates, March whatever of 2019. It's a long way to wait to make cold calls. Not a good move for your cookbook. So we need masterminds outside of this room. So for some of you, this is our managers program or President's Club. Many of you have that place you go. But what other masterminds are you involved in? What can you seek out? What can you create? What can you join? I have a few that I'm involved in, and I pay to be in them. A significant amount of money I pay to be in them, but I know the people in that room are going to help me grow and help push me. And it's really hard to get comfortable in these groups that I'm in, like really hard to get comfortable. I'm like the lowest one on the totem pole, which is cool because it shows me what's possible just when I start getting comfortable. So what kind of mastermind can you find, seek, create that would help you stay hungry? Okay, so what you're going to do with a partner or partners, just 2s or 3s, because the table will be hard to do this, is I want you to share basically how either the technology piece stuff is affecting you or just more the comfort zone personally. You could pick either one, but how do you see this fitting for you? Because I want today to be what do we need to be ready for? It's a thinking exercise around what should we be ready for and concerned about with these dangers of success. So just a couple minutes to do that. Hey, just kind of wrapping up the talk here at the Sandler Summit in Orlando. If you're here, maybe you're out there somewhere. I don't know. If you're not, hopefully you're watching this somewhere and got something out of what we've been talking about today regarding these dangers. You know, the 3 strategies I had regarding these dangers that we can exist when we're going through success are disrupt yourself, be paranoid, and stay hungry. And so if you want more of this, have more of this posted online as far as the overall strategies, but think about where are you in a comfort zone now? Because the danger of success really centers around comfort zone, getting a little too comfortable in what we're doing, and not being able to continue to grow and push ourselves. So if you're here, I'll see you in a little bit. If not, good selling until next time. don't think so. Are we, we started on time. I don't want to go over though, but all my time, you're not saying extra time. Okay. Okay, got it. Okay, time's up. Time's up. We can bring it back. We can bring it back. So I want to wrap with this. I recently saw Darkest Hour. Who's seen this? I'm thinking the last person, that I know who saw it, everyone's like, oh, you didn't see it? But at the very end, on the closing credits, there's a great quote that comes up and says this: success is not final, failure is not fatal, it's the courage to continue that counts. And for today, that all makes sense, but I think especially this first part, success is not final. I think we get in this success trap where we think we've made it, and that's where the problems can begin. So one last thing, those robots. And by the way, I sound like a little buzzkill today. I don't want to be that. I'm really encouraged, actually, with all this technology. We're going to figure out how to use it. And those of us in this room that are on board with disrupting ourselves and being a bit paranoid and saying, hey, we will figure this out. And the cool thing is, a lot of our competition won't, and we're going to leave them in the dust. That's what's cool. And the other thing that's cool, is that cool? The other thing that's cool is the robots haven't figured everything out yet, okay? So I just want to show you our old friend, the robot. He's not as cool as we think he is. Let's play this last one. Hey, have a good rest of your day. Thanks.